Care to chat? Hello and welcome to this episode of the Northern Ireland Social Care Council's popular podcast, Care to Chat. I'm Wendy Austin and it's my great pleasure to host these podcasts, hearing the stories of social care workers and social workers and their clients. And this time the focus is on social work and leadership. There's a really big conversation going on about leadership in social work, about the framework around what leadership means to social workers, both as regards the higher-ups and themselves at whatever level they're currently working. Well, I've some of the higher-ups here today to join in that important conversation, some of the most senior leaders in the field. Chief Social Worker with the Department of Health, Aine Morrison, Eileen McKay, who's Deputy Executive Director of Social Work with Belfast Trust, Marita McGuiness, Assistant Director, Social Work, Social Care Governance with the Southern Trust, and Children's Services Manager with Action for Children, Louise Kearney. And it's great to have you all here. Thanks very much for coming along today. Now, some of you I know have been involved in the development of the Social Work Leadership Framework. I'm going to resist calling it the SWLF. It sounds like some horrible organisation, doesn't it? But what is it, and why is it important that social work has a leadership framework, Anya?
For me, I think there's two key ideas there and two key objectives. So social work is very much a relationships-based profession, and I think that we need to show leadership within the profession in terms of supporting our colleagues, the people we work with, to be able to do the very difficult job they do. So I think that's one part of supporting our social workers to take on that role, to support people, to lead by example, all of those sorts of things in their practice. The other end of it for me is really about the things that social work really cares about and what we're passionate about. And, you know, that is about, I suppose, social justice and tackling injustice, tackling poverty, looking at discrimination. So those big macro objectives of social work. And I think that's where the leadership framework also comes in, because it supports us to embed those values in practice within social work, but outside social work as well.
It's an interesting challenge, I suppose, in some ways, Eileen, isn't it? In that, you know, there's leadership and there's leadership, if I can put it like that. You know, there's the leadership that you expect to have from people who are leaders in an organisation or in their field. But then I think all of the social workers that I've spoken to for these podcasts have talked about their own leadership and about how, as Anya just said, you know, leading by example, that kind of thing. So it permeates right through the organisations, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. And that's why the framework's really helpful, because it helps to define leadership as a responsibility for all of us. The profession attracts people who are interested in creating change, human rights, the values that Anya's outlined. And then when they come into the profession, we want to have a working environment that helps them to flourish and grow as leaders. So the leadership framework starting with you and your responsibility as a leader. We're inclined to think that leadership is a management position, or we look up, we look out, we look around to see who the leaders are. And the framework helps us to distill it down into, what do I do? What's my responsibility? How do I lead both myself, and what's my responsibility to my colleagues and to the profession to lead?
How do you see it working, Marita? And how does your organisation kind of intend to implement that and follow the framework?
Well, I suppose at a range of levels. I suppose just lifting on from Eileen's point in terms of that personal piece, I think social work is in a unique position in relation to the training and development framework that we work within our professional and practice framework. And I think it's a lovely starting point for our workforce that follows them right through their career. So it doesn't matter from pre-employment right through to whatever level you achieve. You have this commitment to learning and development. And I think that is a real strength in terms of our leadership conversation and what we bring to the wider table. So I think that's certainly going to be one of the key elements that we will want to focus on, is making that connection between that personal responsibility in relation to professional development and how that inevitably will frame the individual as a leader going forward.
Now, all of your organisations are obviously part of the wider umbrella of the National Health Service, the public sector, if you like. Louise, you're in a different situation with Action for Children. So how is the framework going to be effective in what you do and what your colleagues do?
I suppose the key part of the framework is that it gives a very consistent tool that applies to a social worker, regardless of what organisation you work for, what kind of organisation, whether that's trust, whether that's community and voluntary sector. We all joined up to be social workers, and then we landed in whatever sort of career path we took. Having this framework adds to that sense of improving our professional identity. We came into the job to make a difference, to change, to lead, whether that's leading in our services on the front line, whether that's leading in at a managerial position, or leading in partnership with other agencies. And our partner agencies are all community voluntary and each of the trusts across. So having this very consistent tool where we can place ourselves, we can sort of place our work, we can benchmark how we lead, we can learn from others. We have a common language, and that's really important that social workers embrace that framework. We love frameworks. We're very good at tools. We're very good at following frameworks. This is what we do in our everyday practice. And to have this gift of a framework that has been created by social workers for social workers is just a great progressive way to improve our social work professional identity and improve our practice of all of us, regardless of what level we're at.
I wonder then, Anya, does that help with the kind of employability across the sector, that you're all on the same page, if you like? There aren't different organisations that are doing wee twiddly bits with different kinds of leadership and different messages. It's clear. Yeah,
I think that's really important. As Chief Social Worker, my job is social work leadership across settings, and that's something that I feel quite strongly about. I think, as Louise has talked about, those things that give us our core identity, are important across the board. I would also say we all work with each other as well, and engage with each other and collaborate with each other. So when we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were, then that's something that is very important.
It's said that all social workers are leaders, and we've had a few interesting conversations around this table when we've been doing podcasts about the fact that social workers could actually just run the world if they were given the chance to do so. And I can see that you're all in agreement with that too. But Eileen, what might that look like in reality, that all social workers are leaders? I think it's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, and as I said, we very often thinking a leader is a manager, yet in my career I've been inspired by my peers as much as a social worker at the front line as I have by people in management positions. Every day social workers are leading in practice when they're working with a family who might be resistant to change, who aren't sure they want to have a social worker in their lives, and from the moment that social worker knocks the door, begins to build a relationship, begins to engage that family, helping them to see ways that they can overcome barriers in their lives, empowering them and enabling them to have better lives. All of that requires a leadership stance for a social worker to be able to shine a light on a future and say things could be better, to offer hope whenever things look dark. All of that requires leadership. And it's a tough job at times because there's a balance about being honest about the realities of the challenges that service users face, but also being able to bring optimism and hope, and holding that. And I always talk about tenacity as being a leadership quality in social work, because when things don't work one way, you find another way and you keep going. and you don't give up. You don't give up on your service users. All of that requires leadership. So that's one example of everyday practice. But I'm also very mindful of the good leadership that happens in our teams over coffee conversations when a colleague comes back from a difficult visit and they're feeling worn down, they feel that they're ready to give up, and somebody else in the team reminds them of the good job they do and why they do it and the difference they make. Again, that's leadership, that's someone standing up for social work. So it's happening every day in all of our teams. It's happening at a more strategic level when we all talk about what social work does, podcasts like this, the Change in Lives video that we have, the messaging that we bring about social work and the narrative that we share about social work. When people ask us what we do, how we do it, why we do it, when we speak about social work, we all have that responsibility to speak like leaders of the profession. So there are many examples like that on an everyday basis at every level.
I wonder, Marita, what's it like managing all of these leaders then, in organisations where people are less empowered than it would seem they are in the social work profession? It's a bit more straightforward perhaps, but if you've got a lot of people who are being encouraged all the time to think about leadership and to act as leaders, does it make them more or less difficult to manage?
I think it breeds creativity and energy. And I suppose in recent years, the social work profession has really committed to the quality improvement methodology and the science around that. And I think that has given us a really positive platform to harness those energies. And we have immense, examples of really creative, dynamic, new ways of working with families and our staff really going the extra mile to test out new ways of working and really making sure that we are making a difference. And I think that's been really positive and has provided a really clear structure for people where they're really able to evidence that they're working in an evidence-based way, which is really important in terms of leadership. So no, I think we're all the better for it, and I think across our agencies we can all see that. We recently had our People Awards in Southern Trust, and the input and representation from social work and social care was just a joy to see, and it was all of that really good leadership in action.
I mean, Eileen mentioned there, Louise, the fact that podcasts like this and other tools, if I could call them that, like the Changing Lives video, which was absolutely terrific. And if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't watched that yet, please do, because it's a fantastic illustration of the way that lives can be changed. But if there are people listening to this and they're interested in this whole concept of leadership, Louise, I mean, talk to me a bit about the kind of examples of the way that it works maybe in everyday practice.
Well, the life of a social worker begins as a student, So as soon as you step onto whatever degree pathway you take, you are open to this whole new world of learning. I don't think anyone comes to the social work degree with a full understanding of what they're getting themselves into, and a whole new world opens up. So at every stage in your academic journey, you have opportunity to go out, to learn, to be with peers, to be with colleagues, and then you have your own input into your placement learning opportunities. So whether that's a project that you have been given to do, whether that's a specific piece of work. So from the get-go, you are being encouraged to be creative and to lead. And then as you join your team and you sort of start to carve out your own niche of how your career is going to develop, you're coming into a workforce that deals with a lot of crisis, deals with a lot of difficulties, but has so many opportunities to make a difference and celebrate success. So, and there's such a variety of roles that we find ourselves in. So there are so many opportunities to, as Marita has talked about, to be creative and to seize the leadership opportunities. I suppose really what we're going back to is building our relationships with people, building our relationships with teams, growing through our professional career, evolving our identity, and really just being given permission to lead at every level is absolutely vital. We're in workforce crisis times here. We're in the flux of change. How could we not lead? You know, sort of we need to lead. We need permission to lead. We need to be led by the fantastic partners we have with us as well. So it's just all about the collaboration, really, you know, sort of, and allowing social workers. We've been very shy, I suppose, over the years about promoting, you know, social work career. You know, sort of, there's times when anybody had asked you what you did for a living, you might have told them you were, I don't know, tax collector or something.
Well, you got a pretty bad press for a long time, didn't you?
You know, you'd have said anything else other than to say, you know, you're a social worker, because you get that look and the, you know, sort of, oh, right, and that people are getting uncomfortable. But yet here we are in the flux of change, a very changing society where diversity, inclusion, participation, that's what is going to take us forward. That is the progression. And it's just wonderful to be part of that evolvement and to allow social workers to commit to leadership, have space to be leaders and to make the change that they set out to achieve in the first place.
So it's not all done and dusted, clearly, Anya. I mean, it's a work in progress. And am I right in thinking that that's how it's going to remain? It's going to constantly evolve, or will it be written down? Or
I mean, it is a work in progress, and you know what the framework does is give us the support within which we can develop people, and within which we can improve our leadership within the profession and in the wider health and social care system, and other sectors as well. And I suppose, you know, for me, in terms of where we go with it, I hope that the leadership framework will promote an activist type of social work, radical social work, a social work that speaks out about things that aren't right, a social work that stands up and says, actually, no, you know, here's what we think we need to take account of, be that human rights or social justice or those other themes that I've already mentioned. And again, then on the more personal side of leadership, you know, it's a good point that we start with our training, but that we also carry that through in our, you know, post-qualifying training, in our team meetings, in our workshops, and that it's always at the forefront of our minds. And I think there's two things we are certainly taught in social work about: interpersonal relationships and about respect for people, hearing views, about empowering others. And that's really, really important in social work. But equally important then that we put those values into practice amongst ourselves as well.
It's, as Louise said, Eileen, it is such a kind of changing situation at the moment in almost everything, it seems. You know, the whole world is in a terrible state of chassis, as Sean O'Casey would have said. And if that's the case, then all of these things need to be agile, don't they? Mm-hmm. And that's a challenge right from the FE colleges and universities that are doing the degree courses. You know, I'm always amazed that they manage to keep up with the changes in things like tech and so on, you know, when they're changing on a daily basis virtually. But that must be quite a challenge in social work as well.
Yes.
What about in your job, for instance?
Well, you're absolutely right. The world that we work in is in constant change, and it's the one thing we can be sure of, that it will continue to change. The demands of social workers increase, the complexity of the job that they do increases. So one of our challenges is staying ahead of that all the time and being innovative to keep ahead of it, being agile to respond to the ever-changing needs of people who need our services. And the framework will help us do that, because there is a domain that is about leading practice. And that, I suppose, is the opportunity for our leaders to focus on, what am I doing to lead practice? How do I make space to stay ahead of the trends and the new innovations, and how do I bring that into practice? What's the scope for me to do that? And Marita has referred to our quality improvement initiatives in social work. We've been good at doing that, but I don't think we can always assume that that will happen without a framework around it. So the leadership framework helps us to do that, and I hope that all social workers will take it and look at the 4 domains and look at how they work within each of those to develop not just themselves, but to develop practice of others and to develop the profession.
Just to remind us what the 4 domains are.
So it starts with leading self, and then looks at leading others, and then leading practice, and then leading the profession. So those domains, I hope that social workers will use, as I said, in supervision. I hope that when we're writing job descriptions, we'll look at how we use those domains, and they will be embedded into job descriptions and into career pathways for social work, because they do help us to frame those that social work does require leadership at every level. And as I said, we can't assume that it will happen. So the framework helps us to embed it into education, both undergraduate social work qualifying, and then there will be a plan to embed it into post-qualifying training for social work as well, so that we continue to grow and flourish. And we talked about employability earlier. That leadership voice to attract people into the profession will be really important, and then strengthening the conditions that people work within will help us retain social workers in posts as well, because with good leadership they will feel listened to and supported, and they can feel they can trust the people around them.
That point, Marita, about attracting people into the profession is kind of crucial at the moment, isn't it? I mean, there is that kind of war for talent going on, not just in the tech industries that we hear about, but very much in your neck of the woods as well, in social work and social care, where there are real staffing pressures, aren't there?
Absolutely. Yes, it's one of our greatest challenges at the moment is in terms of growing the workforce. And we have a tremendous work plan in relation to that, in terms of promoting the profession. And I suppose part of that is about helping the general public understand what social work does. And I think in that we can naturally engage people in that helping profession piece. So we're doing a lot of work in relation to that, helping people to understand the role, and also then appealing to both the academic and knowledge side of the profession, as well as that, you know, it's sort of, for me, it's the heart and the head, and social work really brings that into a beautiful connection that not all professions will allow. And so I think that's another real selling point that we have in relation to the profession. And I suppose the other piece that I'm particularly interested in looking at the framework is around how it supports us to think and develop our ideas around what social work as a profession brings into the wider health service, the whole multidisciplinary context that we work in. And increasingly, I see real value in terms of what social work brings to that. We talk about leading with compassion. That's just at the heart of what social work is. So I think we have a really valuable contribution to bring to those multidisciplinary conversations. And increasingly, I see that in action, where we are influencing even in the political context. And now with the Assembly up, we are particularly interested in building up those relationships and helping our politicians understand the work that we're doing and gain their support in order to support us to do the work that we're doing, given that we're all wanting the same end goal, and that is to provide the support to our communities that they require.
Do you think, Anya, that there's a kind of combination here of the leadership framework? There's also the regulation framework, which has been very much toughened over the past 20 odd years. Does that all give a degree of confidence to social work that was possibly missing before? I mean, Louise talked a bit about that, times when you would have said you did anything other than that you were a social worker. And I can remember I had an aunt who worked in the almoner's office, and I mean, it was really a long time ago in the Royal, and they all felt very, very put upon, I think, too. But there is a sort of confidence now, if I'm reading it correctly, about your profession to be able to say, well, actually, we're doing a pretty good job here.
Yeah, I think there is, and I think we've been building that for a number of years. I think one of the things that we achieved through our previous 10-year social work strategy was about being much clearer about sort of what the core contribution of social work was and what social work was about. And the strapline for the social work strategy was that social work is about improving and safeguarding well-being. And even having that phrase, I feel, has been very helpful, both for ourselves in terms of describing what we do, but also to support others to understand what we do. And I often frame that in terms of, we work in multidisciplinary settings, so I often say, what does social work bring to the table? And I do believe that we have a distinctive professional contribution to make that. And I think probably the uniqueness of that contribution in the wider health and social care sector is that we don't come from a clinical perspective. So we bring a different way of thinking. And we're not necessarily saying that it's a better way of thinking or that, it has to be all about social work. Far from that. That profession... that professional promotion is not about promoting us per se. It's about ensuring that we support people in a holistic way, and that we bring all the contributions round the table. And I do feel our particular. I think we bring additional and alternative perspectives to the health and social care world. That is a very valuable contribution.
And there's a kind of complementary element going on, I think, Louise, isn't there? And it's interesting that we're talking about this health and social care setting and about the community and voluntary sector and the partnerships that exist right across the board there with all of that kind of panoply of what's going on. When you're sitting at a table with other health care professionals, if that's the right way to describe it, what do you feel you bring to the table from a leadership point of view and from the point of view of a social worker?
I think that it's so important to have a social worker at your table, because we are, by the very default of what we do, we are open, we show empathy, we show respect, we're a value-based profession. And regardless of who else is around the table, we're all working with children, with young people, with families, with older people, with all sorts of people across the community. So how can you talk about, make decisions, take any sort of professional judgment about a person's life without having values in that, without thinking about relationships? We don't work under medical models. People do not fit nicely into boxes. They need the holistic approach to whatever the issue is that we're dealing with. And as a social worker, I'm very proud that we can bring that. I'm very proud that we have a profession that allows us, that recognises the value of the values. How could we not be at the table? Is really where I stand on that.
I think so does everybody else around this table, I think too. So if you're listening to this and you want to find out more about the leadership framework, about how it works for everybody at whatever level they're currently working in the field, how do they find out more about it? How do people get involved, Anya?
Well, it's available in all good bookshops, as they might say. It's certainly available online on the departmental website and also through the NISC website. But also, trusts promote this and other employers do as well. So I suppose I would say, yeah, contact any of those particular areas and we should be able to point you in the right direction. But what I would also say is we do want people to see the framework, read it, use it. But there are a variety of opportunities where the leadership framework will be part of what we're doing, what we're teaching. So it could feature in our post-qualifying courses. It could feature in our team building days. So I hope we have multiple opportunities for social workers to become familiar with it.
Look, thanks all of you very much indeed for talking about leadership today. I think it's been very inspiring and I hope that anyone who's been listening to this feels that they've learned a great deal more about both leadership in the profession and leadership in their lives, if I can put it like that, in their working lives. And as Anya said, it's published on the Social Care Council website, or if you have an expression of interest, if people are interested in getting involved, you can contact the Northern Ireland Social Care Council and tell them what it is that you want to say. The social workers keep telling me that you're great listeners and I know you all are, so it's a good place to start. Could I say a very big thank you to Aine Morrison, to Eileen McKay, Marita McGuiness and Louise Kearney. This is Care to Chat, podcast by the Northern Ireland Social Care Council. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure that you subscribe. Do please rate us and, of course, tell all your friends and colleagues.